Hello. For a decade, the Guadalajara Cartel reigned as an invulnerable empire in the Mexican drug market until Rafael Caro Quintero, one of the most ruthless leaders, made a fatal mistake: the kidnapping, torture, and murder of agent Enrique Kiki Camarena. That fateful moment marked the beginning of one of the largest manhunts in DEA history and ultimately ended the reign of terror of this cartel. However, the story of Kiki Camarena does not end with his sacrifice. It also leads to the tragic fates of others, from a brave Mexican pilot to unwitting witnesses who knocked on the wrong door and two innocent American writers who mistakenly stepped into the wrong restaurant. On February 7, 1985, a convoy filled with notorious assassins from the Guadalajara Cartel parked right outside the U.S. consulate in Guadalajara, Mexico. They were waiting for Kiki, and as he stepped out of the building, they immediately surrounded him, pushing him into a car in broad daylight and driving him straight to a secret house. That was the last time anyone saw Kiki alive. Kiki Camarena was born on July 26, 1947, in Mexicali, Mexico. He grew up in poverty, and his family immigrated to Calexico, California, when he was just 9 years old. The hardships he faced did not deter him, but instead forged an indomitable spirit within him. After graduating from high school in 1966, he joined the U.S. Marine Corps, serving honorably until his discharge in 1970. Upon returning, Kiki married his high school sweetheart and decided to pursue a career in law enforcement. With his strong sense of integrity, he quickly excelled in his role, starting from undercover work for the Imperial County Drug Task Force to joining the DEA just a year later. This was the moment his life spiraled into an unrelenting battle. Since the 1930s, the French Connection, a massive drug smuggling network, transported heroin from Indochina and Cuba through Turkey to France, and finally to the U.S. Although the U.S. government dismantled this network in the 1970s, but every time one drug route was blocked, another immediately took its place. The flow of drugs from Mexico to the U.S. became a persistent problem between the two countries, especially as the Mexican government struggled to control the powerful drug cartels. In 1973, President Richard Nixon declared a war on drugs and established the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA. This was a golden opportunity for Kiki, as Spanish-speaking agents became extremely necessary. In 1974, he joined the DEA and began his perilous journey. Although Kiki's family, especially his mother, was worried and tried to dissuade him from engaging in this dangerous work, he remained steadfast in his ideals. For Kiki, the fight against drugs was not just a duty but a way of life. He believed that even as one person, he could still make a difference. And it was this conviction that led him into the history books, whether through his life or his tragic death. In 1980, the DEA decided to open an office in Guadalajara, a city becoming the focal point of the drug war in Mexico. A close friend of Kiki convinced him that this was a golden opportunity to advance his career. Unable to resist the allure of a city full of potential and new opportunities, Kiki discussed with his wife the idea of moving there. The mild weather and favorable exchange rate seemed to convince Mika that this was the best decision for their family. But no one could have foreseen that their lives were about to take a dangerous and dark turn. With only a one-way ticket to Guadalajara, Kiki began his journey. In the 1980s, the Guadalajara Cartel was at the peak of its power, with influence and reach extending throughout Mexico. This cartel was established by notable names such as Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, Rafael Caro Quintero, and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo. Gallardo, the leader of the cartel, was known as El Padrino for his unprecedented ability to unify drug lords. He focused on profits while the other co-founders, especially Quintero, were more concerned with production and violence. This cartel was responsible for transporting thousands of tons of marijuana from Mexico into the U.S., prompting Kiki to immediately identify his top mission as dismantling this network. The Mexican government collaborated with the U.S. to crack down on the cartel, but the reality was not simple. They allowed DEA agents to be present in Guadalajara, but imposed numerous regulations and restrictions. The agents were only permitted to gather intelligence and were not allowed to make arrests. They could carry weapons only during working hours and could shoot only when attacked. These regulations were imposed under the pretext of ensuring that the agents coordinated closely with the Mexican authorities. However, corruption had deeply infiltrated the system, and much of the information from the DEA was concealed to protect drug lords. Under pressure from the U.S., Mexico was forced to launch a campaign to eradicate opium and marijuana plantations, but as the scale of the campaign increased, the number of plantations soared as well. This was when Operation Trizzo was implemented, which included aerial surveillance and crop spraying from planes. One of the pilots involved in this operation was Captain Alfredo Zavala Avilars, Kiki's close friend. In 1982, during a raid, the two coordinated to destroy a vast marijuana plantation of about 200 acres, where hundreds of workers were toiling. Though this blow left the drug lords reeling, but they had no intention of backing down, and neither did Kiki. In 1984, Kiki received information from an informant about a massive plantation in Chihuahua called Rancho Buffalo. He immediately reported to his superiors and requested aerial photos from the Mexican government. However, the photos they received were outdated and did not reflect the current situation. Kiki and Alfredo decided to fly over the farm to take new pictures and confirm the existence of the vast fields with an estimated annual yield of $8 billion. The Mexican government had no choice but to act. They sent 450 soldiers to Rancho Buffalo and completely burned down the plantation. Although such a large plantation surely employed thousands, but very few workers were present at the time of the raid, indicating that someone had tipped off the cartel. This seizure was considered the largest in DEA history, and the drug lords, who once seemed invincible, began to recognize the terrifying threat posed by the DEA. They frantically sought information about which agent had conducted the raid, and that desperation quickly turned into extreme fear. Guadalajara became an incredibly dangerous place, not only for DEA agents, but for all Americans present there. A new war had just begun, and Kiki Camarena was the one leading this battle through its dramatic twists and turns. Earlier that year, Benjamin and Patricia Mascarenas arrived in Guadalajara with the hope of working for a wealthy Mexican family. As Jehovah's Witnesses, they quickly settled into life and invited two of their friends, Dennis and Rose Carlson, who were also from the same faith, to visit. The four friends formed a group to spread their faith throughout the city, knocking on doors, handing out flyers, and chatting with anyone interested in their religion. But on December 2nd, fate had destined them for a tragic end when they knocked on the door of a dangerous man. Ernesto Carrillo, a member of the drug cartel, lived in paranoia, believing that these four Americans were DEA undercover agents. He immediately ordered his men to kidnap them without hesitation. The unfortunate four were taken to an abandoned farm outside Guadalajara, where they were interrogated by none other than Joaquin Guzman, known as El Chapo, infamous for his brutal and bloodthirsty actions. Here, they endured brutal beatings and savage abuse until they were brought to a large grave that had already been dug for them. One by one, they were coldly executed, their blood staining the ground. Not long after, this tragic story extended beyond these four individuals. Journalist John Walker, a writer seeking inspiration for his detective novel, had come to Guadalajara to meet his friend, Alberto Radalat. However, they had no idea that their dinner appointment at a seafood restaurant would turn into a tragedy. This restaurant was owned by the cartel and was prepared for a shady private party that night. A staff member approached them and announced that the restaurant was closed, but when Quintero heard their American accents, he immediately ordered his men to bring them inside. They were led to a back room, where El Chapo tortured them with sharp instruments until one of them, under extreme pressure, confessed to being a DEA agent, although that was not true. After the torture stopped, both were taken to the La Primavera forest, known as a mass grave for the cartel, where over the years, hundreds of bodies had been found. El Chapo shot John on the spot and then wrapped his body in plastic. Alberto was also wrapped in plastic but was buried alive, leaving behind unbearable pain. The deaths of these innocent Americans continued, but the cartel remained relentless in their pursuit of a specific agent they truly wanted to capture. Through an informant, they learned the name of the agent they were hunting: Kiki Camarena. According to the DEA, Caro Quintero ordered the kidnapping of Kiki with the assistance of corrupt officers from the DFS, the Mexican intelligence agency. On February 7, 1985, Kiki left the U.S. consulate to meet his wife for lunch at their favorite restaurant, Camelot. A man flashed his DFS badge and informed Kiki that his superiors wanted to see him. He cleverly stated that he needed to notify his superiors first, not realizing that a trap was waiting for him. Suddenly, Kiki was surrounded by other men who brandished guns at his side and forced him into their vehicle, taking him to a large house at 881 Lope de Vega, where about 50 to 60 people, including politicians, government officials, and drug lords, were celebrating the success of his kidnapping. Kiki was locked in a room where he was subjected to relentless interrogations about the Buffalo Farm, the informants who aided him, and other information. For 2 long, agonizing days, Kiki was brutally tortured. He was mercilessly beaten, burned, and stomped on his back and chest by these vicious assailants. Subsequent autopsy results revealed numerous severe injuries, but it was impossible to determine which injuries occurred before or after his death. In desperate moments, Kiki continuously fell into unconsciousness, but the torture continued, turning him into a victim in a deadly shadowy game he had never anticipated. While Kiki Camarena was enduring these brutal tortures, they brought in a doctor to revive him, injecting his body with drugs that prevented him from ever slipping into oblivion. Each pain tore at his soul while his tormentors continued their questioning. Meanwhile, El Chapo had kidnapped Captain Alfredo Zavala from the airport, and Alfredo was also brought to the same house, where they relentlessly tortured both men, believing that there could be no raid without their support. Eventually, Kiki could no longer endure the pain. His severe injuries had taken his life. They wrapped his body in plastic and did the same to Alfredo, even though he was still alive. Both were then taken to a park, where the Jehovah's Witness group had previously been buried, a secret graveyard. The hunt began, and Quintero was pleased to have killed Agent Kiki. However, his associates knew that the death of a DEA agent would never be overlooked by the U.S. Felix Gallardo, a powerful drug lord, stated in an interview that they never intended to kill Kiki, insisting that anyone who dared to do so must be insane, and he claimed he was not that person. Inevitably, the U.S. government immediately pressured the Mexican authorities. President Ronald Reagan ordered the borders to be closed, creating a massive shock to the Mexican economy. The Mexican government realized they had to act. Just a month after Kiki's kidnapping, the bodies of Kiki and Captain Zavala were discovered by the DEA about 70 miles from Guadalajara. However, suspicious details quickly raised their doubts. There were no signs indicating that this was a grave, and the soil where the bodies were buried did not match the evidence found on the remains. The forensic team concluded that the bodies had been tortured elsewhere and then moved to this location. The DEA believed that the Mexican drug lords, with the assistance of corrupt officials, had devised a sophisticated plan to counter the pressure from the U.S. government. According to this plan, the Mexican authorities would receive anonymous tips that Kiki and Alfredo were being held at the Grupo Bravo farm in La Angostura. This information would then be relayed to the DEA, and in a coordinated raid, the bodies would be found while rival gangs would be eliminated. However, the plan failed miserably because the bodies were not buried in time, and those who were paid to carry out the mission left them on the roadside near the farm. This failure only intensified the fury of the DEA. The La Leyenda campaign was launched, marking the largest drug and murder hunt in DEA history. Agent Hector Barrales was assigned to lead the operation, and ultimately, with the support of the Mexican informant network, he gathered substantial evidence and made a series of arrests related to Felix Gallardo and Caro Quintero. Quintero was the first to be captured in Costa Rica and was extradited to Mexico. Felix Gallardo also fell into the clutches of the law. Both were sentenced to 40 years in prison, but neither was extradited to the U.S. In 2013, A Mexican court shortened Quintero's sentence after he had served only 28 years, but the Mexican Supreme Court overturned that ruling. However, he managed to escape in time. In response, Quintero was placed on the FBI's list of the 10 most wanted fugitives, with a reward of up to $20 million for anyone who could capture him. Ultimately, in 2022, he was arrested by the Mexican Navy once again. Years passed, and the death of Kiki Camarena remained a significant mystery, with many theories proposed, including involvement from the CIA. Agent Bareles, while investigating the case, was informed by a Mexican source about the presence of CIA agents during Kiki's interrogation in the 1980s, a time when the U.S. government was supporting rebel forces against Nicaragua. Rumors suggested that the CIA collaborated with drug lords to supply weapons to the rebel groups in exchange for allowing drug trafficking operations to continue. Kiki may have uncovered this plan, and all those involved feared he would expose the truth, leading them to agree that he had to be eliminated. Unfortunately, after Bareles discovered this information, he was forced into retirement, and his career was left in ruins. Who was really behind the death of Kiki Camarena? Was it the drug cartel, corrupt officials, or the CIA? Everything remains a mystery, but one thing is certain. Agent Kiki Camarena made a significant difference, just as he always hoped. He initiated the largest crackdown in history against Mexican drug cartels. Although he is no longer alive to witness the results, but his legacy will live on in the hearts of many future generations. What do you think about this story? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below so everyone can see. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support me. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.